Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and we are still here at the Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference, having a great time, meeting with friends, living through the pages of our LinkedIn profiles. I have Jason and Mike from FlowerHire here. Gentlemen, welcome, and it's great to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You know I'm right, though. Like the same people you see post through LinkedIn all the time. Now you're just walking the halls like, I know that person, I know that person, I know that. Actually, I don't know them. I just see them post all the time.
You know what it is? The first day at Benzinga is like a wedding where you're the groom. Where you just walk around and be like, catch up.
Yeah.
It's ideal. The funny thing too is, because social media is such a great way to like create some semblance, like a sheen of yourself. And you meet them in person at like 5 inches shorter than you imagined. or they're a foot taller.
Yeah, I didn't picture that the way you sounded.
That's happened to me twice, actually. I remember. So I was working at, I think I've told them this, so I can say it on air. I had a coworker when I worked at Springbig, and when I started, it was during the pandemic. So I interviewed with him, and I only saw him on Zoom from here up. And all of a sudden, he comes to the office one day, and he's like 6'6", and this kid Lewis, and I look at him, he's like, "Hey Todd, I'm Lewis Rivera." I'm like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Lewis is this little guy."
You're usually at this level.
Yeah, you're a giant. I
Usually just a floating head.
Yeah.
It's
funny how that happens,
too funny,
man.
Too funny.
No, but it's 100%. This is a great conference, and FlowerHire has been phenomenal supporters of C-Lab. Aisha is now lobbying to take the show from me, but she's doing an amazing job. So I might have to sacrifice there. But gentlemen, how has it been for you? What are you guys seeing that's out there? What are the trends that are going on? Because they haven't let me out of this booth.
Well, I mean, trends are hard because there's so many of them. I mean, the interesting thing is, it's kind of a sobering mood generally at Benzinga, because I think what it is before, when we first came to Benzinga, there was a lot of exuberance, there's a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
And now it's much more of discernment. People need to take notice. They need to start qualifying the ways in which these companies are being perpetuated.
Yep.
By whom, what's their intentions, where they're going, and there's their durability. So what we're seeing really is, in my experience, a much more sophisticated group of investors, a much more discerning group of investors. And by virtue of that, certain teams that have been in cannabis for a prolonged period of time that have been able to qualify and calibrate really good business practices. So I'm seeing this interesting amalgam of people that are tried and true in the way that they're assessing the quality of the way that they're going to perpetuate their business.
So I don't know how long you guys have been coming to this conference. I had my first one was in 2020. And it's funny, I've seen this conference more from, it's called the Cannabis Capital Conference, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember back in 2020, it was very heavy on like investor seed dating and everything else. And I think this year, you would think because of the lack of inflow and capital in the industry that would be very heavy. But to me, this conference has almost changed to like, it's just where the industry as a whole comes to do business. There's a lot of transaction that goes on here, but not a lot of it. Most of it, I would almost argue, is not truly financial as far as people doing equity or debt deals. I think it's brands getting licensing deals. I think it's partnerships being formed. It's, picking up new clients, touching base with your clients, catching up with your network. It's funny to me because what this conference was built on almost seemed, I don't want to say an afterthought, but a very small part of what it's been. Yeah.
But I feel like that's how most industries might have started out, right? I mean, you get that way until the industry becomes a little more stabilized. And then now we're starting to get into more of a stabilized thing. So it does turn into more partnerships process. Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of what the natural morphing of it probably would be.
That's very cool.
I think that's a good question. I mean, the interesting thing is everyone knows about the capital crunch in the macro and in our instance, the microclimate. I think the thing that's really important is, funding, it morphs. It doesn't necessarily stop. So going back to the idea of it being discerning, there are still people that are accredited investors are still allocating capital into the space, into new markets, because they know to participate is to, can't win if you don't play.
Yeah.
And so there are still people allocating capital, but again, not to the same, I think, wild, enthusiastic, not nearly as much diligence that we saw several years ago.
I think you guys have unique insight into what's going on in the industry right now, given the point in time where we are, right? A lot of companies just, and to put it crudely, trimmed a lot of fat, right? Yep. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way, because I'm friends with a lot of that fat, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And but they had to get lean, and they had to truly just cut down to the essentials, and maybe even a little beyond the essentials, to the point where a lot of people are taking double duty. But you're still here, and that means people are still hiring. So what are you seeing now? Because I imagine those people are getting really strategic and much more specific with the job roles they're looking for. And maybe some of these roles are more of, I don't want to say jack of all trades, but a jack of a few trades versus a specialized spot. What kind of trends are you guys seeing amongst companies that are hiring?
Well, that's why we started an HR advisory practice, actually. So FlowerHire's #1 brand for recruitment, has been for many years now. And over the last year, Mike and I have kicked off a secondary side of the practice, which focuses on everything else in the human capital space. So to your point, we work with a lot of startups, that need basic processes like, a handbook or benefits or just infrastructure like payroll. And then we're working with a lot of our clients who have been around the space for a while now that, to your point, are, I don't like to use the word right sizing, but they're getting lean, right? You said to mention the word lean, and lean means do more with less, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But then you want to do it the right way. Are we structured in the right way with the work and workflow? So that's what Mike and I work with them on, is comp planning and org planning, and just to make them more, it's all about the expense side now at this point. Now that the capital's in, so it's like, are we spending and using the money wisely? So that's kind of what we've been helping out.
Yeah, to kind of marry that, like, there's not a global consensus or even a domestic consensus about not only what do these roles, how do they work, how do they function, what do they get paid for, which we qualify, but more importantly, what does a calibrated version of an organization look like? And the great thing about what we get to do as a practice and as a group is we get to go wherever the markets are. So we get to source domestic best practices, and we get to put those into emerging companies, or if companies need to retrench or recalibrate, we don't say it's about trimming the fat. It's about what, before you even got to the point of the role, respected to the rest of the organization, how is that constructed? What's the structural design? What do you have intentions for them? And more importantly, now the fact that you have to do more with less, maybe the better thing to do is not get to a point where you have to go backwards to go forwards. Why not start early stage to qualify exactly how you go forward collectively? That way you don't overhire and have to dial back, which is a massive expense. Massive.
It is a massive expense. I think, unfortunately, the greater employer industry is suffering from that just because of this bump that we had during the pandemic with, cannabis was in a precarious spot where it was starting to grow. And then all of a sudden this pandemic happens and no one knows what's going to go on, but cannabis is deemed an essential business.
Correct.
And because of that, I think capital, which was a little bit more free at that point because people were playing with fucking images that were making them millions of dollars, right? I think that because
that's so true.
Remember that?
Funny how all your NFT friends are not talking about them anymore, right? But we went through this, like, it's funny because, and I don't mean to go off the rails here, but everyone here talks about the government programs that artificially inflated the economy. What about the fucking NFTs that everyone was buying for thousands of dollars for the longest time? But you had some of these people that were smart enough to get rid of it while it was still hot. And I think cannabis being deemed essential poured a lot more money into the industry, and people just thought it was going to happen forever. So, it sounds like you guys are trying, and I say trying because show companies that is not something that's always going to happen. Just because you have this temporary influx of demand and capital, there are ebbs and flows. And if you build correct, maybe you might have to cut a couple people, but that's just the natural course of business anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no. And, to that point, sometimes we actually have different ways of approaching our clients that they may not have money or capital but what we do is we come in and we try to say, look, if you have an established business, we can also help with the savings of what you currently are using, maybe find you something better, maybe find you more synergy. And then we found different ways to work with our clients, potentially work on the savings side of it. And, in that way we can still get into the business necessarily and kind of help them out as far as, keeping down those costs.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that the pandemic did with the essential service designation was it gave us even more cultural buy-in, but it gave us not really an iota of political clout.
None.
We contribute billions of dollars to the general economy. I mean, for every $1 spent in cannabis, I think it's 1.8 to general economy. We have massive impact. And the essential service designation was, when everyone was basically sitting on the couch and wondered, there was this weird kind of instance where you were being subsidized. I mean, it's a supreme irony that you were being subsidized by the government to stay home, to stay safe. And then you were taking that money to basically repurpose and buy cannabis, which is still scheduled and illicit federally. It also led to new models and new mantras. But to your point, a lot of people, they build off the momentum of a moment, not considering that the future orientation of the world is going to be different. And so I think that's the thing that we're always trying to do, which is contingency planning. You have drive-through for cannabis or contactless points of sale. Hopefully that's the de jure methodology going forward. But if it's subject to change, what will you do in that moment? Not to pivot, but what do you do in preparation of that?
Yeah.
And in cannabis, we're trying to be really proactive instead of reactive. But when the essential service designation happened, I was generally really surprised.
Same.
First blush, I was surprised, and then being as stressed as I was, like, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me too, because it accelerated so many things. It accelerated, the regulations around delivery, around drive-through, around online e-commerce.
Curbside.
Quick service weed.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it was one of the best things that could ever happen in the industry. But then everybody got that false sense of security that it was going to last forever. Like from a regulation standpoint, it gave us the ability to operate very close to as a normal business, obviously heavily taxed. And it still does blow my mind that we get no political clout or support. I was just interviewing a gentleman earlier today. He founded one of the first dispensaries in California in 2004. Luke, I can't remember his last name. I want to say Scarmazzo, and he got raided by the feds in 2006 and spent 15 years in jail. Now, in practice and in theory, what he was doing was 100% legal by the state of California standards, but was federally illegal. And all of a sudden, you're doing everything by the book. California is authorizing you and allowing you and taxing the shit out of you to run this business. And then the feds come in and they're just like, it's crazy to me. And it's the same. I don't want to say the same thing's happening now. But what happened to him is not happening anymore. But we pay all these taxes. We pay federal taxes. We pay higher federal taxes than everybody else because of 280E. We're paying ridiculous state taxes. The consumers are paying ridiculous taxes in the recreational markets. And yet everyone's just like, nah, we're good. We're not going to support you.
I mean, the thing that's really important about the work is the people that have buy-in, the people that we get to work with, the talent that we get to represent, the companies we get to work alongside. The thing that's a really hard thing to swallow is the fact that even though we don't live in a realm where we can expect a raid, the issues that we have and the pernicious things that we have to solve for, and just the sheer amount of entrepreneurial guts and grit to keep going all the time, it's all predicated on a hope and a wish that we're going to get better legislative efforts, when in truth, because we don't have political clout, we're a bargaining chip at some point.
Yeah.
And the thing that's really frustrating for us is we know that this is real, because it's tangible every day. And a lot of people that are non-believers in the space don't realize these are just literally in this room are fathers and mothers, sons and daughters trying to support their families by virtue of the job that they do. They have actual families. But that's just a soundbite until they start seeing, us actually up on the hill trying to make effective change as a collective. But because of the way it's constituted right now, states went out and hopefully they're allocating it on a basis from a budgetary standpoint. But in the meantime, we have to build better in order to prepare for that next instance where we're actually legitimized. So it's patience, but it's painful patience.
Just to kind of circle back, because those are the things we can't control. What we can control, what you guys are doing has got to be a blast, working with these companies, helping them, just helping them be more like normal businesses. Because at the end of the day, I know there's always been a big headbutting between culture and corporate, but at the end of the day, they both need each other to succeed, because one knows the industry and one knows the plant and that side of it. And one knows, hey, this is what you need to do to be a functioning and successful business in America. No matter who you are or what you do, if you don't do these things, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
So to finally see the merging of those two worlds come together and what you guys doing, it's got to be a blast.
I mean, we're having a ball.
We're having a good time.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think this is no different than any other industry. Pick an industry, tech, as for example, the techies started out, they were giving stuff away free, code for free, like Linux and stuff.
Our conferences are more fun.
Our conference is a hell of a lot more fun. That's for sure.
A lot more occupational hazard.
And you're definitely tired the next day. That's for sure. A lot more. But to your point, I think what you're seeing is, how do you keep the passion that the people who started the industry still alive, while at the same time making it successful as a business? I think that's the fine balance. And when you get the grow versus corporate discussion, it's around just that. We want to make sure, and what Mike and I do is we also help companies start their values appropriately. And you build your processes based on those values all the way through. So if you're a passionate organization about cannabis, well, that should be part of your core value. And, do you say that? Do you state that? Do you create policies that support that? And that's kind of one thing that we talk a lot with our clients is what do you really value first? And then let's talk about everything else.
Yeah.
And it really works.
I mean, as a space, it's an unbelievably vivid, accepting culture.
Yeah.
In terms of business, there are some things that are just qualified and eternal. There's some things that you just have to do fundamentally to just operate, like you said, like any old business. No matter how cool the perceptual value is to what it is, ultimately it lives and breathes by the merit of its people, but the way it functions.
Right.
So the idea of just simply selling something that people want is true, But if that's your only way of thinking about it versus all the complementary approach to make it successful and to continue to be successful, I think what you see is a lot of instances where companies start out fast, heavy, and good. Maybe they have mission, vision, values. You know, hopefully they do. They stand for something. They perpetuate something. But it's when they start basically kind of being subservient to the idea of being cool among the crowd versus consistent in the group as a business. That's when you start seeing companies deviate big time.
Awesome, man. Yeah. Gentlemen, where can people find you if they want to work with you?
FlowerHire.com.
Yep.
And it's very complicated. It's Mike at FlowerHire.com.
Jason at FlowerHire.com.
Awesome. Gentlemen, we're going to have to do this again sometime. I enjoyed the conversation. We're definitely more times together. Thank you for stopping by.
It was good.
Man, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bearing with us.